Indeed, Christoph, it is the SDGs that we keep on repeating here, and hopefully we will, together with our global community, reach the goal 2030 and being able to congratulate ourselves with success. When I say ourselves, I don't mean only us, but the global community and the humankind. Next is a topic which is very dear to our heart. Webit has been partner of the United Nations Food Systems Summit, powering the whole summit, the pre-summit in Italy, and then further the global summit, providing the TVS platform and supporting the movement. So I'm sure that our partners will appreciate this next discussion. You know that there was, regardless of the positive or negative comments from COP26, there is one really positive one. During COP27 in Egypt, there will be a food day. So it's very, very important for everyone to be engaged. And here we are, engaging the topic and further building around it. We will discuss now food as global, environmental, and social challenge and opportunity. Why this topic is important? Well, it's very simple. Every single restriction or whatever we do in terms of reducing carbon dioxide footprint or exposure to any chemicals, etc., reflects not only to the planet, of course, and our future lives, but directly impacts the life of 1.5 billion small farmers, particularly in Africa, Asia, but also the rest of the world. It is that important because it's about their lives. And that's why it's so important, technology, to make sure, and we as Global Digerati, to impact both food production and food systems in order, in a positive way, in order to make sure these 1.5 billion lives will not be lost. Now, to talk about this, we have invited a wonderful panel, and particularly I have the pleasure to introduce our moderator, Shireen Santosham.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Shireen Santosham, and I'm head of strategic initiatives at Plenty. Plenty is an indoor vertical farm that sustainably grows vertical vegetables indoors year-round with no pesticides and no GMOs. We grow 365 days a year, and we produce food for our retail partners every day. And we know that globally, we're going to need to produce 3 times more food with no additional land or water if we're going to feed our population. And so that really is going to require an agricultural revolution. Indoor vertical farming is part of that, as well as all of the innovations that the panelists today are going to present. And so it's my honor to really moderate this discussion today. And with COP26 in our backdrop, it's abundantly clear that the food industry is under pressure to change and to innovate quickly. With more consumer focus around health, sustainability, and freshness, the industry is turning to technology to find answers and change the face of food as we know it. So we're here to talk about the role of technology and innovation in ag tech and in really building and advancing a resilient food system. So I'm joined by an exceptional group of leaders in the food space, and it's my honor to introduce them now. So I will go around and just introduce our panelists. Can we start with Jason Clay, Senior Vice President of Markets for WWF?
Hi, I'm Jason Clay. I'm an anthropologist by training. I've also focused a lot on agriculture and agricultural economics. I have also been a farmer, have run a family farm, and of course worked on it as every farm child does. I set up a trading company and helped groups in rainforests begin to sell products into the markets. And most recently, I have become the SVP of markets at World Wildlife Fund, where I work with companies and other producer groups and platforms to reduce the impacts of agricultural production through supply chain management.
Thank you, Jason. We'll move to Didier Toubia, co-founder and CEO of Aleph Farms Limited.
Hello, Shireen, and hi to everyone. I'm a co-founder and the CEO of Aleph Farms. Aleph Farms is one of the companies leading the cultivated meat industry. Cultivating meat is about reproducing the same natural phenomenon of a muscle tissue, which is meat, forming spontaneously into the body of an animal like a cow, but outside the animal under controlled conditions. Starting with a few cells we isolate from a healthy cow, and ending up with a product which is very similar to the meat we can purchase today, and which is harvested from the carcass of a slaughtered animal, but with a fraction of the resources, without any antibiotics, and without animal welfare issues potentially associated with some intensive farming practices.
Wonderful. Now we'll turn it over to Raviv Itzhaky, co-founder and CTO of Prospera.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me. As you said, my name is Raviv. I'm a physicist by education, and but in the last 10 years, I'm working on artificial intelligence, and I'm the CEO of Prospera, which is a data analytics company. We're using artificial intelligence to analyze farm data and then get in-season decisions. We're now part of Valmont, which is the largest producer of pivot irrigation systems. And we're making this kind of system working, collect data and being autonomous and get better decisions for farmers in the field.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to have a great discussion today with these experts. And so I want to sort of frame the discussion first and ask each of the panelists, maybe starting with Jason, to talk about, why do we need innovations in food? And also, why is it hard for consumers to really embrace these kinds of innovations as well?
I think the most important reason that we need innovation in food is that where and how we produce food has the biggest impact of any human activity on the planet, and it always has. But I would also say that food has always been a key source of innovation and technology. We have used food to produce new devices, new tools, etc., to feed ourselves. Probably only military activities and weapons are kind of earlier on the development scheme than food production. But I think the biggest thing is that with more people and more income and more consumption, we can't just do more of the same. We can't keep expanding food production around the planet. We're already using about half of the land on the planet to produce food. So we got to figure out how to produce more with less. And I think that's not going to be a silver bullet. I think we're going to focus on efficiency and productivity, on retiring marginal land and using the better land more efficiently, reducing waste, and changing consumption. We've got to be pursuing all of those at the same time, and in different places, they'll probably be more important or less important.
Thanks. Didier?
I'd like to build on Jason's answer to this question, and just emphasize that the current production systems have been originally developed for feeding, let's say, 1 billion people in 1900, which was just 120 years ago. We're today close to 8 billion people, and close to 8 times more. And we can't just push further the frontiers of the existing production systems to just produce more. Following the two first agricultural revolutions, which were the introduction of machinery and then of agrochemistry, we've increased drastically the quantities, but at the cost of the nutrition, which has decreased. The quality of the food has decreased. We impact the environment negatively. And we need to enter a third agricultural revolution, which would incorporate, on one hand, incremental innovation to make the existing production systems more sustainable, more efficient, and more resilient. But as we take the same existing systems to more sustainable and regenerative practices, we also need to supplement them with new production systems, which we call at Aleph Farms transformational innovation, which would be in balance with nature, which would be net zero in terms of carbon emission and nature impact. And those two types of innovation are needed to optimize the balance sheet of agriculture globally.
Thank you. Raviv?
So in addition to improving efficiency and reducing the use of land and water and fertilizer and crop protection chemicals, there's also the other part of prices. We saw in the last few months the rise in commodity prices all over the world after trying phasing out from coronavirus until recently. And actually, if we want to keep prices in a reasonable numbers, we actually need to invest in innovation and to reduce fluctuations that also that all the countries in the world will be able to enjoy good and healthy food.
Yeah, so we've touched on the importance of a resilient supply chain, and certainly the global pandemic has highlighted that quite a bit, as well as carbon emissions and the fact that we're out of land and water. Globally, we know that agriculture takes up about a quarter of global emissions. And so it really is such a key aspect of how we need to change as a society. So in terms of getting specific about, how we can utilize technology to help drive innovation, I'd like to talk about data-driven farming and how we can use data to create a more sustainable and efficient food system. And so would like to start with you, Raviv, just to talk a little bit about your work and what are the kinds of innovations you're seeing around data?
Sure. So what we see in the last maybe 10 years that there is a huge trend in digitalization in all farm operations. Many farm operations used to use papers for collecting data, but nowadays for a long time using phone apps and sensors in the field and field imagery. And there's just a huge amount of data nowadays. And now, like the company started to use this data to improve the everyday operations, to get decisions about agronomy and about different operation tasks in the field. So we're in Prospera, for example. We're taking these huge irrigation machines, pivot irrigation system that you can see actually from satellites. If you don't know them, this is the circus that you see. And we install sensors and cameras on all over this irrigation system, and then we can collect data through the season. And using this technology, we can actually identify pests and diseases and get decisions about irrigation and how much fertilization is required. And this is how we can improve the efficiency of the farms that use this kind of systems.
Great. And, technology obviously is something that has huge benefits, but is also sometimes difficult for low-income people to access, and farmers are notoriously risk averse. Would love to hear from you, Jason, about how you think technology and ag tech can help break the poverty cycle in developing countries, and how do we start to build some confidence around these technologies?
Well, I think that we have to be maybe a little bit more inclusive about how we use the word technology. I don't think it's just about machines or IT or things like that. I think it's about business models. I think it's about markets, and I think it's about supply chains and how they're managed. But I think that the first thing we have to realize is that today we're not covering the cost of the food that we're eating. So we don't have true cost included in pricing for food. And that's around environmental issues, and it's also around social issues and the poverty issues that you alluded to. So we're expecting the environment to subsidize our production in many cases, whether it's land or water use or whatever. We're also expecting often small scale producers to cover their cost with their own labor, et cetera, and we're not paying them for that. So we need business models that begin to actually reflect what it takes to produce food and recompensing that to make more resilient types of production systems. But here's the issue. Right now, we know that 25% of the poorest performers of any commodity produce about 50% of the impacts, but only about 10% of the product. So if we want to reduce impacts and increase productivity, we need to focus on the bottom, not the top. Most of our technology and most of our work and most of our extension works with what people consider to be the best farmers, but it's actually the worst farmers that are causing the problems. And so can we either get them better, find ways to aggregate them into larger, more efficient systems, or maybe get them out of farming and get them into farming services and other types of things to help make that transition happen. So when we look at the key impacts, we're finding that even within a single crop, there are maybe 3 to 5 types of production systems globally. In any one of those, the difference between the best and the worst producers is 10x. In different production systems for the same commodity, whether it's corn or coffee or cacao or beef or dairy or whatever, it can often be 100x. So we need to know who's producing the impacts, why, what incentives would it take to change that? And those are where we need to start bringing technology to bear, not just on identification of the problems and where they are, but also on learning faster and setting up knowledge sharing platforms to learn more quickly so that we can actually move the bottom, not just help the top.
And embedded in your comments, which are incredibly insightful, is this idea that we might not know exactly where all of these impacts are coming from. Is that correct? That we don't have great data?
Absolutely. I mean, there's probably been more work done on carbon than many other things, at least from a supply chain point of view recently. And to date, every company that's making science-based targets about their carbon emissions in scope 1, 2, and 3 being where the products are produced or where they're consumed, they're all using averages. And so from a point of view of, is an average probably about right? Yes, but it tells you nothing about where the problems are or what it would take to solve those problems. So those averages need to be translated into real strategies, working with real producers. And climate change is going to make all of this much more complicated. Let me just give one example. Farmers can't just get up and move, and yet crops are moving. And so especially in certain places like Africa, with smallholders that are doing tree crops like coffee or cocoa, they can't just move 300 miles or up the mountainside or whatever to produce more crops. They don't own that land. So how do we set up a system that not only encourages more resilient production systems, but supports it through long-term contracts and other mechanisms that let those farmers get access to credit and invest in the new production systems they need, new genetics, new types of shorter trees that put less growth into the tree and more into the product, because they're going to have to be changed every 10 or 15 years now with climate change. I mean, this is the reality as we go forward with climate change. Things are changing really fast. That's why controlled environments like vertical ag are so interesting, because you don't have to worry about the weather. You can provide the water, et cetera, but you can't grow all the different kinds of crops that people like to eat in them yet.
Yeah, and so what you're bringing up is 2 points. One is, how do we build more adaptation into the system for farmers? And then what are those new models that can really help us expand the food system beyond traditional field farming? And so I want to go over to Didier and ask a little bit about your work in cultured meat. And the challenges and benefits that you are seeing for pushing this very new model for eating.
Yeah, sure. Actually, cultivated meat is, in our views, a new category of meat products. Actually, it incorporates the same building blocks of the meat we know today, which are the cells which make it. We use what we call a matrix or a scaffold, which is replacing the extracellular matrix in nature to induce this three-dimensional structure to get to very similar outcome as the meat we know. But again, under control conditions. And this gives us a lot of opportunities for leveraging unique attributes and unique features of this new type of meat. And we see it evolving in the market over the course of the next 5-10 years, same as white wine and red wine, which are two different types of wine, sharing some basic attributes, but having a different value proposition. We see cultivated meat as being differentiated from the meat we're used to eat today, which is harvested from the carcass of an animal. And that's important to understand because some of the inherent benefits of this new production system incorporate, of course, the environmental impact based on a very large-scale study published last year by Delft, which is the only LCA, life cycle analysis, performed on cultivated meat, which is based on actual industry data. And again, in average, to Jason's point, it's just an average, but we should be able to reduce the amount of water needed to produce a beef by 78%, the amount of carbon emissions by 92% using renewable energies, and the amount of land, arable land, by 98%. But beyond that, there are some specific benefits on the public health front. For instance, we use no antibiotics. Today, the massive use of antibiotics at intensive farming practices is one of the key drivers for resistance to antibiotics, antimicrobial resistance, which causes the death of 700,000 people today. It should raise to 2 million by 2040. Our meat also grows without any pathogen in a sterile environment, so we can reduce the occurrence of foodborne illnesses associated with meat, especially in developing countries, but not only. And last but not least, we avoid also the epidemics we see in the meat industry, avian flu, African swine fever recently, mad cow disease, which is resurging in different parts of the world, including in Brazil, unfortunately, which is a big beef producer. So all that together enables us to really provide a unique value proposition, both for the industry and the sector as a whole, and for the consumers. And we believe that by developing the right technology platform and the right product, we will see a quick acceptance of those type of products when available in the market over the course of the next couple of years.
It's fascinating to watch what has been done with plant-based meat already, and the work you're doing is really the sort of gold standard of where we want to go here. Can you talk a little bit about how you view consumers being able to make that switch and what resistance you might or might not face? And then second, obviously, when you're creating a whole new industry, there are challenges around the regulatory framework. And so we'd love to have you touch on that and what can policymakers do to help this industry?
Of course. First, we do see cultivated meat as part of a holistic system-based solution. The goal of cultivated meat is not to replace animal farming, but to supplement sustainable animal farming practices. And we do see it as part of this type of what we call transformational innovation, same as insect-based proteins or algae or other sources of protein production. The consumers are really open and are actively looking for better animal protein solutions, and the relative success of plant-based products over the course of the last few years is really a testimonial of consumers looking and searching for other types of protein products. Based on the consumer data we have gathered, directly in Germany, in France, in the UK, in Brazil, in the US and Japan. We do see overall in most of the countries around 80% of the consumers on the overall population scale open to cultivated meat, with a strong lead taken by the younger generation, what we call Generation Z, which in the UK and the US, for instance, has an expected acceptance as high as 90%, 90, which is huge. And the motivators of different tranches of age or in different countries might be different. Usually the younger generation values primarily the sustainability and ethical attributes of cultivated meat, while the older population is more sensitive to the nutritional and health claims and potentially food security as well. With cultivated meat, we can actually optimize the nutrition of our meat and actually oriented or design, if you'd like, to a certain extent, the nutritional content in terms of fat, saturated fat, which is important for the older population. We do need, same as for renewable energies, a collaboration with public institutions, with the governments, with the European Union, with and different international institutions to drive this transition. I believe that the transition in agriculture should be a private-public partnership. We do need the private entities to invest in public research to vote policies which would support the development of those new solutions in terms of incentives, accounting for the true cost of food, as Jason mentioned, which is a key in our views to a just transition, which would not penalize the farmers implementing good practices, nor the consumers. We're against the tax, for instance, on meat or those type of products, because it wouldn't be socially just. We also need the public institutions to develop regulatory frameworks, to your questions, to enable this innovation while preserving the trust and confidence in those products and ensuring a high level of food safety and intrinsic safety of those products. So to your point, we do see a strong, to summarize this long answer, maybe we see a strong interest from the consumers in this type of newer and better solutions. And we do need to work hand in hand very collaboratively with the governments and with the regulation to make this happen and to fulfill the potential for the benefit, we hope, of all the stakeholders of the meat sector.
It's a very exciting time to be in the space. Raviv, in terms of, listening to Didier talk about where he is going with his company and the space, can you talk a little bit about how you use artificial intelligence to drive both, traditional farming as well as these new technologies?
Sure. So as I explained before, there's a huge amounts of data in the field. And one of the problems is just that it's too expensive to analyze all of this data. So for example, if you take imagery of a field, and fields can be huge, you can take thousands of images of only one field. And if, for example, a farmer or agronomist needs to analyze all of this data every day, just doesn't make sense economically to do this. And nowadays, with computer vision and artificial intelligence methods, we can analyze all of these images and data automatically and extract the real information that you need for getting decisions. And actually to make all of this data to insight and to things that you can really use in the field. But this is only one example. Another one big thing that I think is going on right now in all the agriculture tech sector is field robotics. Nowadays, using this kind of technologies, you can give machines that move in the field to actually navigate autonomously in the field. and the ability to make much more complex tasks. For example, as we see, many companies right now are using artificial intelligence to analyze what's going on around the machine, and for example, do automatic weeding and harvesting of special fruits and vegetables, things that were very human labor intensive in the past, and we can really improve the efficiency and actually move. It really allows us to move some of the operations to places that labor costs a little bit more expensive because you improve the efficiency of the operations in general, reduce the amount of people that need to work in the operation. So I think this trend is going to be much stronger in the next few years.
Can you, so touching on that, one of the things at Plenty that I've encountered is we bring together a very vibrant but diverse group of people, from engineers to plant scientists to growers, and there isn't always today there isn't always a talent pipeline that exactly fits our model. And so can you talk a little bit about the kinds of people that you hire and what kind of training people will need from universities in the future to do this work?
Sure. So we're in the company of a combination of different, actually it's a very diverse. So we have people that are software developers and data scientists and algorithm developers, experts in artificial intelligence, and of course agronomists and like the domain experts. So for every artificial intelligence system that you develop, you must incorporate inside the process the domain experts. They're the people that really understand how the operation works and understand the challenges. And I think that bringing all of these people together to one place, and it just so I think developing it just developed the imagination of everybody, and combining these abilities together. So what we do is actually build processes of how to develop a new product. So we build teams that are sometimes some people from each group, and using and then building the product together. They work together, and this is how it works. It's it can really this is the best way to build this ag product, because actually there are not many people that are both agronomists, both data scientists, and everything together. And in my opinion, for example, in ag universities, it's very important to teach a little bit of computer science and data science, that to give these abilities to all of these people, that in the future they will be able to be very independent in building this kind of products.
Can I actually add in something here? Yeah, we've been interested in not just the environmental impacts of the global food production system, but also the fact that if it comes to a choice between feeding a child and saving a tree, the tree's going to lose every time. And so we've got to come up with alternatives that actually address poverty, that address malnutrition, that address food availability and affordability. And so I think this is why I keep coming back to what are the business models. We've just finished the development of a project with 24 different organizations in St. Louis to do a vertical ag project there. It will be the largest in the US, and it will be built on brownfields in downtown St. Louis, accessing a Black community as a primary labor force because it'll be right next to them. It's also going to be taking advantage of stranded assets, using heat and water from a thermal power plant, and the hot water will be used to generate both cooling systems for the plant to produce food in a food desert. We've also insisted that the the entity that won the bid on building this actually hold a percentage of the equity open for the community to invest in. So it's not just owned by a company, it's actually owned by the community that it's also helping to serve. Well, if you look across the food system, we basically have systems that have been built in place for the last 100, 200, 300, sometimes even more hundreds of years. Imagine if you were starting from scratch. How would you build that system? Well, right now we have that opportunity. We're just looking in the US at where is the next California going to be in the US food system? And we think it's probably going to be in the mid-delta because of the amount of water, the amount of land, the amount of labor, et cetera. But if you're going to rebuild the California system, you don't want to just build it back. You want to build it better. You want to build it greener. You want to build it with different business models so that you have full-time labor that moves from farm to farm. You have value-added processing that happens locally that generates labor as well. So there are different ways to think about the food system, because my fear is that most of our approaches on technology are focused on really high-end markets in developed countries. How does this technology ever get to developing countries unless we begin to look at the employment aspect of it? And it's really in the rural areas that you have 75% of poverty, 75% of malnutrition, 75% of stunting. Robotics doesn't help that, it actually hurts it. And so we've got to figure out how to address some of these issues, or else we're going to be solving one problem and creating two more.
And I think this is such an important point. At Plenty, we are building a very large farm in Compton, California, also in a food desert, and working with the community very closely to make sure that we're hiring locally and providing pathways for equity in our company as well. And certainly what that does is create year-round jobs in urban areas in the US. But this point about rural areas and how do we push out these innovations is a really critical one. And so I want to go back to Raviv and talk a little bit about the issue of power and in rural areas. And obviously a lot of your innovation requires electricity, connectivity. How do you think about that sort of today in rural areas in developed countries, and then really overall as you expand into developing countries where there's just no power or access?
Yeah. So actually in the last few years, we had some really leap in several technologies that allows us to do this kind of things. So first of all, regarding communication, nowadays there's several companies that build satellite communication solutions from Starlink and some other companies that also do this. So I guess in the next few years it will be available everywhere, and the huge investment that the rural areas couldn't fund, for example, of cellular communication, is now being solved in just different technology. Regarding power, so this is also something that really new technologies just happen for other reasons. So if you install solar panels, like small systems of solar panels, you can use it for example, for even using for pumps of irrigation and for charging your future robots that you will use in the field. So I think these kind of problems are about to be solved.
Wonderful. Didier, you also spoke a little bit about power needs and the need for public-private partnerships. I hope you could touch on that a little bit, as well as, we've talked about supply chain in terms of providing food, but could you talk a little bit about how your model would change supply chains and what inputs you need across the globe?
That's a great question. Actually, we do see today a problem with the existing food system, which is that it hasn't been designed to feed the people. and that's a bit striking, but it's a fact. We are throwing away 30% of our food, while close to 900 billion people don't have access to enough food every day. So technically, we produce enough food, but it does not get to the right place at the right moment for the right people. So we really need to refocus the whole system for more locally produced, shorter cycles and shorter supply chains, more information, more digitalization to be more agile and to adapt quicker, so that we can provide high quality nutrition for anyone, anytime, anywhere with a resilient system. And here, if we talk about meat, for instance, or beef, which is what we do at Aleph farms, the current beef sector relies in very large part on import, export, global trade, remote production of feed, remote production of meat. For instance, in the Middle East, where the company is currently headquartered, most of the beef is imported. We're based in Israel. 88% of the beef is imported because we don't have the available land, water, the climate suitable for farming animals. We're working closely with the UAE, the Emirates, which imports virtually 100% of its beef, but also in Asia, China imports 90% of its beef. And by the way, a lot of the pork and other meat produced locally is based on imported feed, especially from South America. So it's technically imported. Japan, which is one of the largest economies in the world, imports 65% of its beef. Countries like Singapore, which are pushing very hard on food security, import virtually 100%. So we do see a kind of a real stress today on the supply chain, especially following COVID-19, which calls for decentralizing production of quality nutrition, empowering the communities, and shorter production cycles and more digitalizing. That's actually what cultivated meat does. We can produce our meat anytime, anywhere. We've been the first company to produce meat in space with our partners, Toubia Printing Solutions. When we can make meat on the moon, we can produce meat in the center of the Sahara or in the Antarctic. Our vision would be to put a production system in a large container, to drop it anywhere on Earth, to push a button and to make meat. Meaning, obviously, it's a dream. It will never be exactly like that, but the concept, the vision, is really to be able to provide this resilient and decentralized circular production for high quality nutrition for anyone, anywhere. And this is part of the third revolution I mentioned before. To make it happen, we need to make sure that the incentives are aligned and that governments stop incentivizing unsustainable practices and account for the environmental impact of farming practices in the subsidies, which is what the UK has started to do at the end of last year within their new 5-year plan. We need to account for the true cost of food. We need to fund the transition of farmers toward more sustainable practices. Farmers are actually very risk adverse because they're farming for a living and they can't take the risk to lose their revenues. So we need to support them. We need to invest in systems which can provide economical development to parts like food deserts or countries in the Middle East, Asia, which need heavy investment in capex and infrastructure to develop those new production systems. And overall, the regulation also has to develop relevant frameworks for this innovation to get to market. So that's my answer regarding supply chains, which is connected to food security, obviously, and to public-private partnerships. Those are two very important topics.
I think this is a great answer and summarizes really what needs to happen in the food system overall. We only have a few minutes left, so I want to just give everyone 1 minute to talk about what their predictions are of key trends in ag tech in the next decade. So why don't we start with you, Jason, and then we'll move to Raviv and then end with Didier.
Okay, so I just want to question our time frame. And I want to do that because the latest modeling shows that the negative impacts of climate change will be felt at least until 2500. That's 21 generations. It's not about our kids or our grandkids. It's much longer than that. And we need to be thinking in timeframes that are much more significant than what we've been doing, 2030, 2040, 2050. So where the food we eat and how it's produced, all that's going to change, even where it's produced. But I think a lot of the new systems are probably going to be layered into existing systems rather than take it over. We don't have a case in human history where a new food has been introduced and dominated by 30% or more a market in less than 50 years. In fact, even in 100 years, you can't find them. We've looked. We just don't have experiences around that. Food is a very personal, a very cultural thing. Changes don't happen immediately. And the biggest issue that I think is a problem is that the private sector can't do all of this. It can't lead all the discovery. It can't really change national markets, and governments aren't investing in the changes needed, especially when you think about a 21 generation time frame. Yeah. We can't get governments to focus on next year, much less the next generation or 10 generations.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. That's an excellent point, and a call to action for our policymakers. Raviv?
Yeah, so I see three trends. Maybe first one is the actual use of precision agriculture, of applying what is necessary to the field only when and where it's necessary, and about water, fertilizer, and crop protection products. Second trend is the field robotics that I mentioned, reducing the amount of labor necessary. And the third, also relevant to plenty, is the move to indoor for high-value crops. It's clear that it makes much more sense for many of the crops to do it like that.
Thank you. Didier, I just ask you to be very brief as we have only a few seconds here.
Yes, we believe the food of the future, as we call it, will be locally produced with more resilient supply chains, including combination of sustainable conventional farming practices with new production systems, such as cultivated meat, indoor agriculture, and others. And we'll also be more personalized. I think that we're pushing back a little bit from standardized global food. People want to reconnect to their culture, want to know where their food comes from, and want to rebuild this emotional connection with food.
Those are wonderful words to end on. Thank you all. This has been a really fascinating discussion. I'm very excited to see where each of you takes your companies and your initiatives, and all the best. Thanks very much.
Thank
you.